I guess I'd be happier still if it were Red Bull or Mercedes. But I'm delighted to see Alonso back. I think his absence the last 2 years, but more than that, really, his absence for the last 6-7 years, given what he had to drive, I just think has been a criminal waste of the best of his generation. In a very kind of childlike way, I guess, I've often thought he's the only driver of the current generation who reminds me at all of how racing drivers were when I first fell in love with the sport. In other words, I don't know if you remember. Do you remember at Spa one year when he was with Ferrari with Felipe Massa? Shell showed a movie in Malmedy one night of the 1955 Belgian Grand Prix, a Shell film, and they asked us all to turn up wearing sort of as near as we could, what we had to hand, 1955 clothing, and the two drivers showed up, and I mean Felipe was slightly ridiculous in the sense he was wearing a kind of Tyrolean hat and whatnot. He sort of did his best, but kind of missed the boat. But Alonso, I thought, geez, you look at him now. I mean, that's so close to how Castellotti was when I saw him in the paddock when I was 9 years old. So there's that. But I think he's. I think he's what Sterling used to go on about. I'm a racer boy. I'm much more than a driver. I'm a racer, and I think of all drivers in this generation, he personifies that. I remember watching at Monza one year. I was invited to watch the race from the Renault pit, and I had a headset, and it was Alonso was in the lead car and Fisichella was in the other one. And I think it must have been, 05, something like that. Anyway, I remember Montoya won the race in a McLaren, and Alonso was second. But what struck me was it was fascinating having a headset. I mean, it's the only time I've ever experienced that in an actual Grand Prix. And what was so noticeable about it was that there was hardly any conversation between Fernando and his race engineer all through the race. He just wanted to know the absolute bare minimum facts. Fundamentally, he wanted to know where Kimi was. He was thinking about the championship, and he just concentrated on his driving. It was interesting. I mean, quite often he would be talking quite casually and lightly, going through the lesmos and that sort of thing, which of course has to impress you. But what struck me was that Fisichella's engineer was on the blower to him the whole time, essentially saying, "Giancarlo, for Christ's sake, get on with it. You've gone to sleep." And what was significant was that every time he did that, Giancarlo responded. So, in other words, the race engineer was right that he had gone to sleep. But I think Alan Permain was Fernando's race engineer, or no, it might have been Rod Nelson. But there was none of that. And I remember at the end of the race saying, making that point that there was hardly any conversation, whereas with Fisichella it was sort of endless. Come on. And it was Rod Nelson thinking about it. He just said, Fernando, every lap, Fernando is on it. Every time he's in the car, he is on it the whole time, and you never ever have to G him up, and at all times you're getting 100% from him. So again, that's just the pure relentless racer. I'll be fascinated to see, actually, whether he will be, slightly more laid back than he was. I actually don't really expect that. I honestly believe that as long as Alonso's in a racing car, you're going to get 100% all the whole time. I think those years at McLaren really did wear him down, and not surprisingly. He still drove some mighty races, even in those circumstances. But I think it must be if you're someone with as great a talent as he has, to be fighting with and getting blown away by people with a fraction of the talent, week after week after week. That is that is going to get to you, and I'm not surprised it did with him. But I still think even so, he never actually relaxed his effort. I remember one time at Silverstone, in practice, I think it may have been actually qualifying, it may have been Q1, but the conditions changed. They were changing, and right at the end, he slapped on. He dashed in, changed tyres, and then dashed out again, and went from literally the bottom of the list to the top. So he finished up Q1 fastest. And I remember saying to him once later, talking about that, I remember the conversation with Gilles Villeneuve long ago, particularly in 1980 when Gilles was really struggling with a terrible Ferrari. But again, Gilles never relaxed ever, never for a second gave up. And I remember Gilles coming out with this phrase at the time. He said, when you're in the position we're in at the moment, it's what keeps you going is little victories. He said, first of all, finishing a race and being able to say to yourself, yeah, well, you were only fifth, but I swear to God, nobody else would have been fifth. You could not have done more than you did. And he said, and as long as you could leave a race with that in your head, then it just enables you to go on. And I mentioned that phrase to Fernando and said, well, Gilles used to talk about little victories, and Fernando said, that's it exactly. And so I think in their kind of never say die mentality, I think those two were very similar.